Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Bachelor Nation News. The morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Joan Vassos stood by the window, coffee untouched, watching the pale light stretch across the sky. Normally, mornings were her time, moments of reflection, gratitude, and hope, but this morning felt different, heavier, as though something unseen had shifted in the universe. Her phone vibrated once on the table behind her. That single sound would change everything. Joan turned slowly, unaware that the life she knew only moments ago was already slipping into memory. The message was brief, trembling with urgency, written by someone who struggled to find the right words. "Joan, I don't know how to say this. Please call me." Her heart began to race. She called immediately. When the voice on the other end finally spoke, the words came fractured, weighed down by shock and disbelief. Chock Chapple was gone. The room seemed to tilt. Joan's knees weakened, and she lowered herself into a chair, gripping the phone as if it were the last thread tying her to reality. She heard explanations, an accident, sudden, tragic, unexpected, but they blurred into a distant echo. All she could hear was the silence where his laughter used to live. Chock had been more than a companion. He was warmth on cold days, steadiness in moments of doubt, and the kind of presence that made chaos feel manageable. He had an easy smile, the kind that didn't demand attention but earned it. To Joan, he was safety, he was possibility. Now, he was memory. In the hours that followed, Joan moved through her home like a ghost. Every corner carried him, his jacket draped over a chair, the mug he always used, the notes he scribbled and forgot to throw away. She picked one up. Just 2 words were written there. "Don't forget." Tears finally came, uncontrollable and raw. She cried not just for the loss of Chock, but for the future they would never get to unfold. The conversations left unfinished, the dreams paused mid-sentence. News of the tragedy, fictional though it was, spread quickly in this imagined world. Messages poured in from friends, supporters, and fans who admired the bond Joan and Chock shared. To them, Chock represented kindness, loyalty, and quiet strength. To Joan, he was love rediscovered when she least expected it. That evening, Joan sat alone beneath the dim glow of a lamp, holding a photo of them taken on an ordinary day. No red carpet, no cameras, just 2 people smiling without knowing how fragile moments truly are. "Why so soon?" she whispered into the stillness. Grief did not arrive politely. It crashed in waves. Guilt, disbelief, anger, longing. She replayed their last conversation again and again. There had been laughter, there had been plans, there had been tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Days passed. Joan withdrew from the world not out of weakness, but out of necessity. Healing, she learned, was not about moving on, it was about learning how to carry the weight without letting it crush you. One morning, as she walked through a nearby park they once loved, Joan noticed something small but powerful. A bench they used to sit on had been engraved with words left by a stranger. "Love doesn't end, it transforms." She sat there for a long time. Slowly, Joan began to speak again, not loudly, not publicly, but honestly. She shared her grief with those who reached out, reminding them that love, even when lost, remains meaningful, that pain is the price we pay for connection, and it is a price worth paying. In this imagined chapter of her life, Joan chose not to let tragedy define her entirely. She honored Chock not by sinking into darkness, but by carrying forward the kindness he embodied. She smiled again, softly at first. She laughed, though it surprised her when it happened. And in quiet moments, when the night grew still, she spoke to him in her thoughts. "I remember," she would say. "I won't forget." Chock Chapple lived on, in stories, in memory, in the invisible strength he left behind, And Joan Vassos, though forever changed, learned that even after the biggest shock, the heart has a remarkable way of continuing to beat. Not because it forgets, but because love never truly dies. When daylight faded and the world grew quiet, Joan Vassos found herself listening for a sound she knew would never come again. The soft vibration of Chock Chapple's phone, his familiar footsteps moving through the hallway, the way he used to say her name as if it were something precious. Night after night, silence replaced him, stretching endlessly, painfully. Sleep refused to stay. When it did arrive, it brought dreams so vivid they felt cruel. In them, Chock was always alive, smiling, reaching for her, asking why she looked so sad. Joan would wake with tears on her pillow, heart pounding, grief fresh as the first moment she heard the news. She began writing letters to him. Not to send, not to share, just to survive. She wrote about her anger, how unfair it all felt. She wrote about the fear she never admitted while he was alive, the quiet terror of loving again after loss. She wrote about the future that once felt so close and now felt impossibly distant. "I wasn't ready," one letter read. "I thought we had time." Time, she learned, is never promised. Friends worried about her. They encouraged her to step outside, to rejoin the world. Some days she did. Other days she simply couldn't. Grief did not follow a schedule. It arrived uninvited and stayed too long. One afternoon, Joan discovered a box tucked away in the back of a closet, something she hadn't noticed before. Inside were small things Chock had saved: ticket stubs, folded notes, a pressed leaf from a walk they once took together. At the bottom lay a card addressed to her, written in his unmistakable handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "If you're reading this," it began, "it means life surprised us again. I don't know how or when, but I want you to remember one thing. I was happy, with you." Joan pressed the card to her chest, sobbing openly now. The pain didn't lessen, but it changed shape. It softened just enough to let love sit beside it. As weeks turned into months, Joan slowly returned to the world. Not the same world she'd known before, but a quieter one, marked by awareness. She noticed how people rushed past one another without really seeing. She noticed how fragile joy could be. And she noticed how strong the heart becomes when it has no other choice. She began speaking publicly in this imagined reality, not about tragedy, but about presence, about choosing love even when it scares you, about telling people what they mean to you before it's too late. Fans and strangers alike reached out, sharing their own stories of loss. Joan read every message. She answered some. Others she held close, realizing grief connects people in ways happiness never quite can. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Joan stood at the same window where her life had changed. This time, she didn't turn away from the light. She let it wash over her face, warm and gentle. "I miss you," she whispered, "but I'm still here." And that truth mattered. Chock Chapple's tragic death, this fictional loss, left a scar that would never fully fade. But scars, Joan learned, are not signs of weakness. They are proof that we survived something that once threatened to break us. She would never stop loving him. She would never forget. But she would live. And in doing so, she would carry his spirit forward, not in sorrow alone, but in courage, kindness, and the quiet decision to keep going when the heart aches most. Because even after the saddest update, even after the biggest shock, life, somehow, still whispers. The phone rang just as dawn broke, its sharp sound slicing through the quiet of Joan Vassos' kitchen. Morning light spilled softly across the floor, catching dust in the air like tiny stars. Joan almost ignored the call. Nothing good ever came that early. Still, something in her chest tightened, urging her to answer. "Hello?" Her voice was calm, unaware it was about to shatter. There was a pause on the other end, a breath, Then words that arrived slowly, painfully, as if the speaker feared they might break the world the moment they were spoken. Chock Chapple was gone. The mug slipped from Joan's hand and shattered on the floor. She didn't notice. She couldn't hear anything beyond the echo of those words. Gone. The word felt impossible, unreal, something that belonged to strangers, not to the man who had laughed with her just days ago, not to the future they were still planning. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, gripping the edge as if the room itself might drift away. Her mind raced, searching for explanations that could undo what she'd just heard. There had to be a mistake. There always was in stories like this. But this was no story. Chock's absence filled the room instantly, louder than any sound. His jacket still hung by the door, his shoes still lined neatly below it. Joan stared at them, waiting for him to walk in and make a joke about her worrying too much. He never did. As the hours passed, the truth settled in like a heavy fog. The tragic death, sudden, cruel, and unforgiving, left no space for preparation. One moment, life was moving forward. The next, it was frozen in disbelief. Chock Chapple had been more than a partner. He was the calm after storms Joan never spoke about, the steady presence that made her believe joy could return even after loss. He listened when she talked, remembered the small things, and loved without demanding perfection. With him, Joan felt safe enough to hope again. Now, hope felt dangerous. Messages began arriving, friends, family, people who admired their connection. Words like "so sorry" and "heartbreaking" filled her screen, but none of them could explain how the world could keep spinning when hers had stopped. That night, Joan wandered through her home, touching things as if they might disappear too. The couch where they sat talking late into the night, the window they loved to stand by during storms. Every memory felt sharp, but she clung to them anyway. Letting go felt worse. She found herself in the bedroom, opening a folded piece of paper in Chock's handwriting. He had written it casually, never imagining the weight it would one day carry. "No matter what happens, choose love over fear," it read. Joan pressed the paper to her chest and cried until there were no tears left. Grief didn't arrive all at once, it came in waves. Some moments she felt numb, as if wrapped in glass. Other moments the pain struck so suddenly it stole her breath. She learned there was no right way to mourn, there was only survival. In the days that followed, Joan withdrew from the world, not because she didn't care, but because everything reminded her of what she'd lost. Silence became her refuge, even though it hurt. In that silence, she spoke to Chock as if he could hear her. "You weren't supposed to leave," she whispered one evening. "We weren't finished." Slowly, something changed. One afternoon, Joan stepped outside for the first time in days. The sky was wide and impossibly blue. Life, unfairly, continued. She felt angry at it, at the birds singing, at people laughing, at the way the sun still shone. And yet, she remembered something Chock once told her. Life doesn't stop for grief, it invites you to walk with it. The memory hurt, but it also steadied her. Weeks passed. Joan began to share her story in this imagined world, not the tragedy itself, but the love that existed before it. She spoke about cherishing moments, about saying the words we save for later, about choosing connection even when it feels risky. People listened. Some cried. Many reached out, sharing their own losses. Joan realized grief had quietly built a bridge between strangers. Chock's tragic death would always be a part of her story, but it would not be the end of it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Joan stood once more by the window where she had first heard the news. This time, she didn't feel only pain. She felt gratitude for having loved, for having been loved, and for carrying that love forward. "I'll live," she said softly into the fading light, "for both of us." And in that moment, the shock didn't disappear, but it softened. Because love, even in loss, leaves behind something stronger than heartbreak. It leaves behind in the corners of purpose. her days, hiding in ordinary moments, the empty passenger seat beside her, the silence after a joke no one finished, the instinct to reach for her phone before remembering there was no one left to call. Chock Chapple's absence became a presence of its own, heavy and constant. Some mornings, Joan woke believing for a split second that everything had been a terrible dream. In those brief moments, hope fluttered dangerously in her chest. Then reality returned, sharp and unrelenting, and she would lie still, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the pain to pass. It never fully did. Instead, it changed. Joan began walking every evening just before sunset, following a path she and Chock once loved. At first, she cried as she walked. Later, she talked. She spoke to him about the sky, about the people she passed, about the memories that refused to fade. Strangely, those conversations made her feel less alone. One evening, she paused near the old oak tree where Chock had once carved their initials with a pocket knife, laughing as she scolded him for damaging nature. Her fingers traced the faded letters. "Why did you leave so suddenly?" she whispered. There was no answer, but there was peace in asking. Joan realized grief was not something to conquer, it was something to carry, and carrying it required strength she didn't know she had. As time passed, invitations came, events, interviews, gatherings she once enjoyed. For a while, she declined them all. But one day, she accepted a small, quiet invitation to speak at a gathering about love and resilience. Standing behind the podium, her hands shook. Her voice nearly failed her. "I didn't prepare for loss," she said softly. "I prepared for love." The room fell silent. She spoke of Chock, not of how he died, but of how he lived, of his patience, his humor, the way he made people feel seen. She spoke of the danger of postponing joy, of assuming tomorrow would always arrive. By the time she finished, there were tears, not just hers, but everyone's. That night, Joan understood something important. Chock's story didn't end with tragedy. It lived on through the lives he touched and through her courage to keep going. Back at home, she opened a small wooden box she'd avoided for months. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and a watch Chock once joked he'd pass down someday. She held it gently, no longer overwhelmed by the ache. It still hurt, but now it also warmed her. "I'll take care of this," she murmured, smiling through tears. Slowly, Joan began rebuilding, not replacing what was lost, but reshaping her life around it. She planted a small garden in the backyard, something Chock always wanted to do but never had time for. Each flower felt like a quiet promise to grow even after devastation. There were still hard days, days when laughter felt like betrayal, days when memories ambushed her without warning. But there were also moments of light, unexpected smiles, genuine laughter, a sense that life, though forever changed, still had meaning. One evening, Joan received a letter from a stranger. It read, "I lost someone too. Hearing your story helped me stay. Thank you." She held the letter for a long time. In that moment, Joan realized something profound. Grief had not taken her voice, it had given it purpose. The shock of Chock Chapple's tragic death had broken her open, but from that brokenness came compassion, understanding, and connection. Standing once again at her window, watching the city lights flicker on, Joan spoke aloud, no longer with desperation, but with calm resolve. "I loved you deeply," she said, "and that will always be enough." The pain did not vanish, it never would, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to breathe again, to walk forward with sorrow in one hand and gratitude in the other. And though Chock Chapple was gone in this imagined story, his love remained, woven into Joan's strength, guiding her toward a future she would face bravely. Because even after the biggest shock, even after the deepest loss, the heart, when given time, remembers how to beat again.